Give me something about Stoicism which you would prepare someone mentally for any event of crisis or stress.
Stoic philosophy can be actually a very tactical tool for the mind. It teaches you how to understand your emotions, but not act under the influence of emotion. Because when we act under the influence of emotion, we might as well be acting under the influence of drugs and alcohol, because it affects our mind the same way. Our judgment goes down, and that's not going to lead to a good outcome. So with Stoicism, it's a tactical tool to practice to learn what's within your control and what's out of your control. Because Viktor Frankl said between stimulus and response, there's space. And in that space is the power to choose your response. And you can have that time. It could be a second, it could be a minute to choose your response despite your emotions. And that's where your tactical prowess lies, in your ability to choose your response and giving yourself some time. And Stoicism teaches you how to do that, to be more tactically effective when it comes time for you to perform as a protector of your family.
What's going on, y'all? My name is Vincent Vargas. I'm the host of the Time to Head North podcast, brought to you by the North Group. Security refined by intelligence. Time to Head North podcast. This is brought to you by the North Group. This, you see my sign here, says security refined by intelligence. It is a company that can help you with corporate security, with personal security, and many, many other things, including intelligence. So if you guys have any questions, please hit them up at tngdefense.com. I have my guest with me today, Brady Pesola, a buddy of mine for many years and someone who I believe deserves a bigger platform for not only his skill sets in security, but his knowledge in Stoicism, which has been extremely valuable in helping anyone, men particularly, reframe some of their thought process, I believe perspective. And, you know, you're a warrior and a kind of poet, if you will. And so I just really appreciate your time with us today on Time to Head North.
Hey, brother. Thank you so much for having me. Good to see you again, as always.
Dude, so, you know, this podcast existed a couple years back. It still continued. I left because I left the company to pursue film and television further. I've been with the North Group for a long time. My buddy is one of the owners, and you know, they've done a lot in the security space that I wanted to be involved with, and so I kind of jumped on with them early on. And I got a call to kind of revamp the podcast, and so here we are. And I thought it was interesting because I already have my podcast, but this is a space I think is extremely important because we need more people talking about safety, security, personal security, home security. I mean, the list goes on, and I thought it'd be great to create a podcast that could hopefully help people in answering some questions like that.
That's really cool, man. I'm definitely down to answer whatever questions you need, and let's talk about some safety and security.
Let's talk about, first and foremost, a family man. What are some things in your own world that you make sure that you're always prepared for and ready? You know, in the event that, you know, life happens and the worst case scenario, what have you prepared in your own family that you're ready to take action when needed?
The biggest thing is prepping your family to begin with, getting them in that mindset where, hey, if something does happen, these are the steps that we need to take, A, B, and C, to affect our safety, our security, and or our survival. The first thing I could do, the first thing I did when I could do it was actually move my family away from a big metropolitan area. Now, not everybody can do that, right? I lived in San Diego. I decided that I'm going to move my family to the mountains. My wife agreed. She's all about the mountain life. And so up here, I can now affect better survival strategies for my family should things happen, or safety protocols should things happen, right? Taking steps and procedures, things like knowing all the routes in and out of the mountain, knowing the back routes in and out of the mountain, knowing my neighbors, collecting intelligence on my neighbors. And you can do that, which is a lot of fun, actually. Getting to your neighbors is actually the number one step in intelligence strategies of where you live. Who lives around me? Who's an asset and who's possibly a liability to me when things go to hell? Are my neighbors going to give up intelligence on me? Are they going to give up information on me? How much information do I divulge to my neighbors? And so you gauge the people like that. I like to go around my neighbors. And the first thing I did when we moved up here is there was a pretty bad winter. What did I do? I went and shoveled out the driveways of my neighbors. I got to know them. They came out. They said, thank you. I got to gauge their behavior. I got to gauge how well they noticed things around them, but also giving goodwill towards my neighbors, kindness, not because, hey, I just want to collect intelligence, but also because I'm a neighbor. That's a good thing to do. But I got to know their conditions. I got to know who they are. I got to know what their resources are. Do they have a shovel? Do they have a snowblower? Things like that. And there's so much information you can gauge for your neighbors, whether they fly a flag, what kind of car they drive, all sorts of fun stuff. So moving away to an area that's going to be more safe, that you can affect your safety, security, and survival, but also setting your family in a mindset of safety, security, and survival, and then getting to know your neighbors right off the bat once you get in that area.
I know you do a lot of, well, I don't even know what, prepping, if you will. You're someone who's been known to teach prepping, done prepping. Do you think it's something that every family should do? Me personally, I was living in Utah when the whole COVID issue happened, and I got very complacent because as much as I was making good money film and television, you kind of get soft on the other sides of your mentality, or at least I did. I was like, well, what do I need to worry about right now? Got a good job, things are going good. And then all of a sudden COVID happened. We're on lockdown. I haven't taken out my pistol in 6 months, and before that probably another 6 months, So I went in my garage for about an hour, and I'm getting all my gear organized, and like, this is for one kid, this is for another. And so I started prepping at the last minute, and I even had to call a couple buddies, like, dude, I need more magazines, man. And it was this thing where I was like, what did I do? I felt back in my training and got very comfortable. And then you started talking about food resources. And if you know Utah, just the faith alone of LDS, they're really good about conserving food. They have about usually a year to 2 year supply in their basement. And so that alone, it became the number one place where it was hard to find food because they were snagging all the food they possibly could as a culture. And so me and my wife were like, we're in trouble. I had to get food from California, have my mom ship it to me. I mean, the list goes on around the things that I was doing just to make sure that the family was safe. And I luckily financially was in a good place where I can order beef from a company and be able to kind of keep sending it home. But that's not always the case. And so what are some things that you recommend that every family should have kind of in their house in the event of another COVID? Let's just say if we use COVID, for instance, but for any kind of event.
Absolutely. What's funny about COVID is that should have set everybody in a preparedness mindset. And people think of preparedness, they think like doomsday preppers and the fat guy with a machine gun and a rascal. That's not what prepping is, right? Prepping is saying, I have some extra things on hand that if things go south, if I can't get out of my house, my car breaks down, I lose my job. Because when people think about prepping, they think, oh, it's a disaster or something. But they don't think about prepping in terms of if I do lose my job, if I can't go anywhere, if I, for some reason, become immobilized for sickness or injury or something like that, I need to have things on hand that I can access, that I don't have to rely on somebody else like Grubhub or Uber Eats or things like that. But the first thing people should do is learn how to cook, because you need to learn how to take materials and any type of ingredients that you have and make something nutritious out of it, right? And then have an abundance of food on hand. And I'm not talking, steaks and things like that. I'm talking that you can take some foods and some ingredients, go, you know what? I can take this macaroni, and I'll tell you, preparedness is a skill developed by impoverished people, because impoverished people look and take things and go, how can I make something a full meal out of a piece of bread and some spaghetti and some butter and make a food out of it for me and my children? I know, because I grew up like that. And you didn't always have the most nutritious food available, because I don't know if you noticed, Vince, but nutritious food, good, wholesome food is really expensive nowadays, and junk food and crap food is really inexpensive, and that does nothing for our bodies. So learning how to cook food, learning nutrition is the first thing that you should do preparedness, because you need food to survive. You need food for your morale. The other thing people don't think about is if you're consuming 6 to 10,000 calories a day and you have food stocked up that's calculated for 2 to 4,000 calories a day. I don't know about you, Vince, but when I become hungry after a certain time, anything to eat, I turn into a completely different human being, and it's not pleasant, right? I'm really digging a Stoicism and go, I'm hungry and everything annoys me. Why does your face look like that, right? So the biggest thing is people need to also start learning about conserving calories. If there's hard times coming up, then you need to start cutting back on calories and start realizing that, okay, if the average daily caloric diet of every person they calculate to be 2,000 calories, and you're eating 10,000 calories a day, and you cut from 10 to 2 in a day, what do you think is going to happen to your judgment, your morale? What do you think is going to happen to the morale around your family, right? So if you're being a complete a-hole all day long because you're hungry, do you think your wife and your kid are going to be happy and thinking about survival? Or are they about thinking trying to survive your attitudes when you go from that, right? So
I've seen a chaplain's assistant steal pancakes in ranger school, right? You never thought when people are hungry, they do crazy things. So never thought I'd see that.
Right. So the first thing you should start doing in a preparedness situation or things coming up, or if you do want to be prepared, is start thinking poverty, right? And it's funny, as you said, when you started making money and acting, right? When you get money, you think that's your number one resource. Money is your resource. Everyone lives for money because you have to. We all live for cash or money or some sort of currency. So when you make a lot of money, you think, it's fine. I got plenty of money. I'll just buy my way through survival. Well, if the grocery stores are closed down and they don't have food, which up here in the mountains, it happens. The grocery stores run out of food because either tourists are buying food because their Airbnbs, they got locked on the mountain because there's so much snow and the roads are closed down. And the locals got to eat too. So now, what does money do for you? It doesn't do you any good if you can't buy food, if people won't give you food, right? And so that's another reason I moved to the mountains, because I can go trout fishing, I can go hunting, I can do what I got to do. I got little snacks out in the yard called squirrels and ditch chickens and things like that are, So think poverty. Don't think because you got money that you're going to buy your way out of a survival situation, as COVID should have taught a lot of people. But all COVID told us is to hate our neighbor because they decided to make a medical decision, or they didn't.
Yeah, it's crazy. So food's a big one. I see that's a big one. Me and my wife have been talking about getting some dehydrated food. Those last a shelf life of somewhere around close to 25, 30 years, which sounds like interesting. Is that a good idea, or what do you think?
You always have to factor in your morale, the morale of your wife, and the morale of your children, because if everyone's in a bad mood, survival decreases exponentially, and personal survival maybe decrease. You might get whacked in the middle of the night because everyone's been eating dehydrated food and don't feel very good about it, right? So dehydrated food is always good to go, but make sure it's good quality dehydrated food, because what happens is if you get dehydrated food because it's cheap, it's not going to have the nutrients. It's not going to taste very well. It's going to require a lot more water, and it's just going to be just a morale killer. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't buy dehydrated food. You should always have some sort of food on hand at all times. But with dehydrated food, what other resource do you use that's even more precious? Water, right? So you also need to make sure that your water supply is good. Is it coming out of the faucet? Cooking with water coming out of the faucet's not it's fine because you're boiling it, right? Because it's safe. When you boil water, it's fine. You're gonna be okay. But also, if you just have a limited supply, now if you're on a well, no problem. Go out there, pump that well. If you have a well that requires electricity to pump that water, well, then you got to make sure you have a generator. So now, for the dehydrated food, you got to have water. If that water's connected to the grid, or if it's connected to electricity with a pump, now you got to think about gasoline and something else, right? So you see how everything kind of goes through of the things you need to think about in a survival situation. And if all you're eating is dehydrated food all the time and not getting that nutrition, your like I said, your judgment, your intelligence, your creative thinking all just kind of goes to hell.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to rethink that
But don't, but
one.
hey, don't get me wrong though, because I can't. I've done 30 miles down the PCT, and then at the end of the day, I had some really like Mountain House, which Mountain House actually isn't bad. Like Mountain House is pretty good, REI. But the problem with dehydrated food is that it is expensive nowadays because you got places like REI selling it, and everyone's like, "Ooh, gourmet, this is fantastic." But you can also make your own dehydrated food. You can actually save a lot of money. And it teaches you nutrition. It teaches you food preparedness and preparation. If you get a dehydrator and then start dehydrating your own food, now you can create your own ingredients. You can cut steaks up and chicken and dehydrate it and throw it in there. You're saving a lot of money that you could use for other things towards your preparedness as well.
Love that. So food, it's a big one. I'm going to go to, how about how's medical? How much are you involved in having good medical understanding at your house?
Oh my goodness, medical is such a huge thing, and I'm glad that I'm in a job where I think about medical all the time, because in executive protection and personal security, you have to think about not just your own medicine, but your the medicine of your client and the client's kids. And so I'm teaching a lot of medicine to my wife and my daughter, how to put on a tourniquet, right? So if I go away and we live in the woods and my wife loves to send me pictures when I'm thousands of miles away of her using a hatchet chopping wood, I'm like, please don't do that. Don't send me those pictures. But because she does that, because our heat comes from a fireplace, I teach her how to put on a tourniquet, right? In case she cuts her fingers off or something, high and tight, and Teach Triple C has gotten to the point where it's actually such an easy thing to teach. And for those who don't know what Teach Triple C is, technical combat casualty care. But there's TEC, which is a civilian version, which is great too. But medicine is basic things like treating bites and stings, especially for my daughter, who, when I take a sliver out, she thinks I'm doing heart surgery. She's scared. She thinks she's going to die if I'm pulling a sliver out. And I'll tell you, I learned something about my wife that I didn't know. Last month, I pulled a sliver out of her, and when I took a bobby pin and kind of picked the skin a little bit to open it up, she saw blood, and she started going down. Like I caught her and grabbed her. I was like, I did not know that. 15 years of marriage, I did not know that about her. So
Yeah.
know what your family reacts to. So my daughter does not have a high pain tolerance at all. Like, she stubs her toe, it's the worst thing in the world. And now I found out my wife, at the sight of blood, at her blood, I don't know about my blood, but her blood, she's going to go down. And my daughter saw that, which some might say, hey, that sucks. No, because at that point, I told my daughter, hey, did you see what happened to mommy? She goes, yeah. And I was like, so what happens if mommy cuts her hand or fingers? If they're out cutting wood or something like that? She goes, she's going to pass out. So what does that mean for you? She goes, I'm going to be responsible for 911. You absolutely are. So your kids got to know what to do. But learning medicine beyond bite and stings, learning how to treat dead, like deep cuts. I was talking to Will last night, and he was giving a story about dirt medicine versus clean medicine. Dirt medicine is you're out there and you're just improvising things, which I was like, I never heard it like that, but I love that, right? So medicine is so big, and especially up here in the mountains, right? Because if I get snowed in, or if the roads get blocked by trees and falling, right, the ambulances are going to come get you, and they're already taking care of other people. So you got to learn how to take care of yourself, get medications ahead of time. Do you have life-saving medications? And I'll tell you, one thing that people don't think about that I learned when I quit drinking is if your habits cause you to be a medical liability to your family, you need to think twice about that. If you're drinking, if you're abusing substances, and over time it degrades your body where you need dialysis or pills to live, and you can't get to the hospital, you've now become a liability. If you're a man and you're head of your family, you need to start being more moderate in your substance intake. Big time.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because you become a liability.
Absolutely. And I think about people who are diabetics, people who have bee sting allergies, and that becomes a big threat as well.
Absolutely. You got to know where your EpiPens are. And the one thing that people don't realize is like EpiPens, they throw an expiration date on those EpiPens. And then you got to go pay another, I don't know how much they are, but they're expensive.
Yeah.
Now you got to what? People do say, and I'm not giving this as medical advice, disclaimer. I do know that some people do keep expired EpiPens around because they do last another year or two. But don't quote me on that. Do your own research. Get on Google and do your own research on that. But no, your family should know where your EpiPens are. They should be around where they can grab access to it. Your family should know your allergies. They should know your blood type. You should know your kid's blood type. You should know your wife's blood type, and you should know your blood type. And unfortunately, for some people, they figure out that not me. My daughter looks like me, but when people started looking for blood types, they start figuring out their kids may not be theirs. A buddy of mine who's a nurse actually said you'd be surprised how often that happens when they're going blood type, mom, dad, kid.
Yeah. I did that. I did that 23andMe with one of my daughters, and I was like, "Here we go."
I will never do a 23andMe ever again because there may be a kid somewhere floating around after 4 years or eight years in the military. So it's like, So, but anyway, yeah. Know your family's allergies, know your family's blood type, know your family's medical weaknesses, allergies, things like that, and then have a plan on how to treat that, especially if you're in an area where resources can be limited due to weather and disasters.
How much do you involve guns in your personal protection plan?
Well, being that I am a exec protection agent, obviously it's a natural part of my existence. So quite a bit. I think every man ought to have the capacity to protect themselves. And if you're a man that does not know how to protect his family, you know what? I'm not going to say anything bad, but I have my opinions about that. And if you're a man or a woman, if you're a single mother and you have kids, I think the most empowering thing a person can do is to learn how to operate a firearm accurately, safely, and effectively. Going to the range, learning gun handling, learning gun safety. Because I think the more that you learn about firearms, the less fearful you are of them. And that the more I know of firearms, the more skilled I am, the more I know I have a better chance than the regular jackwad that tries to break into my house. Most burglars, most people, felons, and bad people that try and break in your house and have a firearm don't even know how to safely disarm the firearm by even ejecting a round of the chamber, right?
Yeah.
Most of them don't even know how to do that. They know how to put a magazine. How many videos do you see all the time on Instagram or social media events where someone's like playing around, and they end up popping a round up or shooting themselves in the thigh and the femoral? You're like, I'm not scared of these idiots because they don't go to the range and shoot very often. You know that because ammunition's expensive. B, they don't know how to clear a jam, obviously, right? So the more I don't know about firearms, the less I'm worried about other people having firearms because I know half the population can't even shoot accurately. They don't go to the range. When I was a firearms instructor and selling firearms, I'd sell it even to just a regular person so I just need a firearm. I just want to buy one and just store it in my case. I'm like, do you want training? No, I'll figure it out when time comes. That is not a safety plan, right? That is not. Yeah. And so I know half the people out there don't even know how to use their own, and they legally have a firearm. They don't know how to use it. So it's part of everything. It's part of me. Obviously I live in California, so I have to have a CCW to carry illegally around with me. But so that being said, I take my daughter to the range. She knows how to operate my firearms, but I do keep my firearms safe as per California law. And my wife knows how to use a firearm. She knows how to rack around in the chamber. She knows how to fire it. And we go to the range, as much as I can get them out there. My wife's not a big fan of firearms, but she understands it's a part of my life. And she loves that we have the right to do so. but she just doesn't like the loud boom. But teaching her and training her, my daughter, I think is very, very important. And the more my daughter knows about safety and firearms, the more I know that she's not going to pick it up and use it and play with it and see it as a toy.
Yeah, I think I agree. I've tried to introduce firearms to my kids, and not all of them are very comfortable with it. A few are, and that's fine. And, we can go shooting from time to time, under all the safety precautions everyone knows. But my wife is not very comfortable with firearms. As much as I've taken her, she's just super nervous. And I said, that's fine. That's fine. You better carry a knife. You better carry a knife. But, I don't push her to learn it. I know that, in the event she does have, we have dogs that can be a defense mechanism for her if I'm out of town and whatnot. And, I have my pistols that I carry with me always. And, I have, my firearms in the house. My oldest son who lives in the house is pretty familiar with it, in the event of an emergency. I can trust that he can handle himself pretty well. But I try not to put that pressure on him, just more so like, let's go shoot, have fun, in the mindset of like understanding familiarity with the weapon. But I think I train enough for everyone here to try, and if in the event something happens, I would just have them keep loading mags for me. Keep loading mags.
Keep loading rounds in there. Hand them to me as I go. Stay down. Stay behind cover.
Yeah, load mags. Go. With this election coming up, and I don't mean to sound like doom and gloom, but you never know when someone gets elected or if someone doesn't get elected, what could potentially happen. And so this is why the conversation became important to me to ask today, because I don't know when this podcast come out, probably around the time of the elections, probably within a week after, if so. And in that case, we could be facing a lot of rioting. It could be burning, rioting, who knows, because some of the civil unrest that we've seen from other elections and whatnot, from both sides, who knows, right? Not pointing any fingers, just saying there's a potential for that to happen. And I want to make sure that those who are listening have a little bit of a kind of a thought of how they can prepare themselves, how can they keep their families safe. If they're going into these busy cities that tend to have a lot more of these protests, that's a fear for me, right? I will tell my wife to avoid major cities at this time. I tell her to go around them or just completely avoid if we have to go to something. Please go ahead.
So I was working personal security during the BLM riots in 2021, and June 2021 in Los Angeles was a very, very interesting time. And I remember standing on top of a client's house where they had a nice patio overlooking all of Los Angeles and seeing the helicopters and seeing the fires and seeing where the demonstrations were at. And the one thing I learned about those demonstrations, so those who want to take notes as far as the demonstration goes, and even when the Biden and Trump election happened, working that in the city of Los Angeles where people had boarded up windows and boarded up their businesses and going around and checking on these businesses we were hired to do, people were afraid because of the pattern of violence that had happened in Los Angeles. So what I noticed about those protests is those protests are going to happen in major areas where there's going to be major media coverage. Where are areas that the media is going to be most focused on? Where's the most damage? Where's the most destruction that they could cause? Or where's the most visible area that's going to be more interesting, right? What I did notice is that these protests, when they moved through the city of Los Angeles, they stayed in major areas that were highly accessible for both media and for other protesters, meaning bus lines and areas where they could get to that was easy accessible. So Uber, if they didn't have to Uber too far, if they didn't have to taxi too far, if they didn't have to bus too far, they will go in major areas. Santa Monica Boulevard was one of the biggest places that people protested. And then on Rodeo. Why Rodeo? Because we know Rodeo in Beverly Hills to be a very fancy place. There's a lot of expensive things over there. So glasses were getting broken, looting was happening, rioting was happening, and then it got major attention. So when people riot, they're looking for that media attention. So they'll clear roads for media. They see a media van, they've cleared roads for them.
Wow.
They've gotten in there so the media could get in and see. And it wasn't too hard to mask up and get in and see what was happening. Actually, at one point, I was hired by a company to dress up and film and take pictures of Antifa in San Diego during the riots as well, and that was an interesting experience. So what I also noticed is that in Los Angeles, bordering a lot of the major city, are these hills, the Hollywood Hills, the Sunset Hills, and Beverly Hills. Humans take the path of least resistance. That means they're not walking their ass up the road to go to houses. So a client's house was right near Sunset Boulevard, and we could see them passing. They wouldn't go up the hill because they would talk about, oh, let's go and attack the houses of the rich. And we were getting calls all the time. Like, I was turning jobs down that were $700 a day for $1,000 a day because people were afraid that they would walk up the hills and come up there, and they would. They just stayed in areas that were easily accessible and easily visible to the media to see what was happening and what was going on.
Yeah, I had a barbershop in downtown Salt Lake City area, and they ended up rioting within 2 blocks of our shop. I was pretty nervous about it. And so I ended up moving the shop completely once that was done because I didn't want to feel like I could potentially lose all of that because of a riot. But I also had personal friends who were in law enforcement, and they were affected by some of the riots that happened or the protests that were happening at that time, and pretty crazy stuff. And when we were in Utah, my wife was nervous about driving the kids to wrestling practice or whatnot during that time because if you take the wrong street, are they going to block you in? Are they going to attack the vehicles? Some vehicles were getting bottles thrown at, whatever the case. And so I just think about, my buddy went out hunting and he said, hey, my wife's going to be home alone when the presidential election date. And I'm like, yeah, that's going to be a pretty interesting day, or it could turn into a pretty interesting night. And so, for me, I would tell anyone who's listening to this who's curious about it, like, if you have plans that night, let's just kind of stand by, right? That's the moment we should all be home with our loved ones and in a safe environment. And if you live close to the major city, just kind of be prepared for what could possibly happen. Some major cities that know that they've had pre-existing issues in the same manner, I would expect that probably happen again. And so I'd be very prepared. It's something that we're here at the house been talking about and trying to. We have softball, we have wrestling, we have soccer, we have all kinds of things going on throughout all areas of the city. And so that night is going to be more of like, let's go home at a safe hour and let's just stay together and let's just see what happened, what evolves from that night.
Make a plan, and then make a plan, an escape plan. Just like any time when you prepare for moving a client, I always tell guys that I know, treat your family as if they're your client. If you're an executive protection, you, as Pat Mack likes to say, you are the executive protection agent in charge of your own detail. And as a man, the first thing you should be doing in those major crises and scenarios is staying sober. You should not be drinking. You should have a clear mind and a clear judgment, because now your family are relying on your judgment and your capacity to be able to get them out of there. You should have 3 routes. Know where you got to go. Know where there's a level 1 trauma center along those routes. Know where police departments are. Know where hospitals are if you need to get to. Know where the gas stations are. Know where the food is along those routes to escape, right? Know if there's assets, friends of yours that could be an asset to you and your family. Like, hey, we're heading out, letting you know, have a plan. Hey, are you guys leaving too? Yeah. Hey, we're heading up this route. You might want to do it as well. And this asset might be someone who is like-minded, has the same tactical training or medical training, or same type of preparedness mindset that is going to be an asset, not a liability. Then some of your neighbors might be a liability too. This is why I say get to know your neighbors, because your neighbors might be allied with the type of protests that might happen. And are they a liability to you? Or do they tend to freak out a little bit more easily than others? Are they medically a liability? And that's now where you decide, am I going to help my neighbor? They have oxygen tanks or things like that. Do they need to get out? Those kind of things. I had a buddy of mine call me up, and he's like, hey, man, just to let you know, the protest is within a block of me. I'm like, all right, cool. And he goes, I'll tell you what, though, I'm having a good time. I I am shit-faced. I'm like, bro, you need to sober up right now. He goes, yeah. I was like, what happens? You got to get your family out of there. He goes, oh, that's a pretty good point. I'm like, good, damn, bro. So, but that being said, have a, lock yourself down at your place. Have a plan, right? You know what was interesting, Vince, and I've never heard anyone talk about this, but I noticed this as the analogy in Los Angeles of people spreading lamb's blood on their stores and their businesses. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
People would, for those that don't know what I'm talking about, Genesis, what happens is if you paint lamb's blood above your door, the Holy Ghost will pass over your house, right? And a lot of people would do that. They would paint things that were allied with the protest movement at the time on their businesses, in support and hopes that they would leave their business or their house alone. I'm not saying it worked, but it might have. I didn't get to study it too often, but I was like, that's lamb's blood. Like in my head, I was like, oh my, that's interesting.
Yeah, something that happened during the, I don't know what year it was. I think it was the 1994 earthquake. I think it was 94, 92. We found out that it was a Monday morning, and I think everybody was going to wake up and go get gas, but most of the city was out of gas. They had low gas. And so at one point they opened up gas stations. There was people waiting in line for gas for hours just to try and put gas in their vehicles. And it was something that now is it's constantly in my head that like, hey, always fill up your tank. Fill up the tank just in case. Like if I need 4 hours to go, fill up the tank. And so it's something that for sure the night before I'll make sure that our tank is full. And just in case we have to, escape and evade, we have at least 4 hours in the tank.
Absolutely. Never, executive protection. We're always filling the tank up the night before. If we had the client the next day, the first thing you do at nighttime, because we know the worst thing you could say is, I'll fill it up in the morning. No, you're not. You're not going to do it. You don't want to. You're not going to want to stop. We always lie to ourselves. So definitely always before you get home at nighttime and park the vehicle, your gas should be filled up with, or your tank, your car should be filled up with gas. Never let it get below a half a tank, especially, if you got to disappear and your wife's got to use the car, use the car. That's just good etiquette as a spouse, leave a good amount of gas in the vehicle. And trust me, look, I'm not perfect. I forget sometimes, a lot of times, I don't know. Sometimes, my wife is better at than I am, but you got a vehicle, 2 vehicles, they should at least have a half tank gas at all times, if not full, when you come home. That way, if you need to pop smoke, you're good to go. And then having, if you have an SUV, we see all the times the cool kid cars and the off-road vehicles have that those gas tanks on the back, having a couple of those actually attached to your car in some way or the other, or inside in a container is not a bad idea. Just always give it a good vent because it does get hot outside, and the last thing you want to do is have some sort of accident. Because I don't know if you've ever opened a gas like a gas container when it's been hot outside and not depressurize it first or crack it just a little bit to let that gas out. And it goes boom. You're like, and you don't explode. Obviously, that doesn't happen. But you just get that whole pressure releases, and you go, all right, now we know to do that.
Well, Brady, I appreciate your time, man. Appreciate all the information, dude. Give me something about Stoicism before we leave that helps maybe in what you would kind of prepare someone mentally for any event of kind of crisis or stress.
People think of Stoicism as like bro Stoicism, that the alpha males, like, I don't do. That's not what it is. In fact, actually, Stoic philosophy can be actually a very tactical tool for the mind. It teaches you how to understand your emotions, right? We feel anger, we feel stress, we feel fear. When things happen to us that are adverse, like disasters or like breaking in. And the one thing that you can do with Stoicism as a tactical tool is to utilize it to recognize your emotions, but not act under the influence of emotion. Because when we act under the influence of emotion, we might as well be acting under the influence of drugs and alcohol, because it affects our mind the same way. Our judgment goes down, our tactical capacity goes down, and we're sitting there looking at things through the lens of emotion, of anger. And that's not going to lead to a good outcome. So with Stoicism, it's a tactical tool to practice to learn what's within your control and what's out of your control. I can't control that there was a tornado or hurricane or snowstorm or disaster, but I can't control how I react to it, right? And when you recognize, hey, I'm feeling fear right now, or I'm feeling panic, all right, we're going to let this settle for a second before I react. Because Viktor Frankl, he was a Holocaust survivor. He said, between stimulus and response, there's space. And in that space is a power to choose your response. And that power to choose your response lies your growth and your freedom. You have a physiological reaction inside your mind. There's two routes that information takes in your brain, the high road and the low road. The low road is thalamus to amygdala. Your amygdala is responsible for your quick reaction when someone scares you. Get in that judo stance, right? But it's your buddy. And that information is also taken the high road, right? It goes through the sensory cortex. It goes through your neocortex, which is responsible for higher cognitive thought, rational thinking. Then your hippocampus, responsible for contextual memory. And that contextual memory, when you're like this, goes, oh, it's my buddy. And then it goes to your amygdala, and you can decide right there, I can get away with popping this guy, but I'm not going to. But it's within that space that Viktor Frankl said that you have the power to choose your response, and you can have that time. It could be a second, it could be a minute, it could be an hour, it can be a day, it can be a month, but you still have the power to choose your response despite your emotions. And that's where your tactical prowess lies, in your ability to choose your response and giving yourself some time. And Stoicism teaches you how to do that, to be more tactically effective, to be more rationally sound when it comes time for you to perform as a protector of your family.
Man, that's incredible. I'm sure there's going to be people who want to know more. Where can they find you?
Hey, look me up over at the Gray Man Project. I'm shadow banned because I'm a mouthy kind of guy. But that being said, hit me up on Instagram, grayman.project, gray, GRAYMAN .project, not Gay Man Project, but I get that's all right. But Gray Man Project, you can hit me up and I'll be there. And I always check my DMs and spam. So if you got a rational, logical question, I'm always happy to respond, but I don't respond to drama. I don't do drama these days. I'm over it.
Awesome, brother. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us on the Time to Head North podcast with our hosts here at TNG, the North Group. Really good information, man, and I appreciate it. Thank you for your time, brother.
Thank you, brother. Good seeing you as always.
You too, man.